As a kid, my parents and I took a trip to Paris. I was beyond excited. I mean, I heard so much about it and couldn't wait to live my best life. I would be sipping hot chocolate, visiting all the museums, and of course, seeing the Eiffel Tower. It was the iconic symbol of Paris, and I was buzzing with excitement. So after days of sightseeing, we're walking up to the base of the tower, and I slowly start to get a little apprehensive. I just assumed that seeing the monument would make my fear of heights just vanish. And there were also hundreds of people going up and down those elevators, and no one I saw had died yet, so it couldn't be that bad, right? I was so wrong. The second I stepped onto that elevator, everything changed. My heart was pounding. My knees, they were instantly jelly, and it felt like I couldn't breathe. There was this raw, innate feeling coursing through my body. Fear. Fear happens in seconds, and it grabs all my thoughts and my actions in its grip. It instantly activates my sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight response, because it thinks that my body is in danger. While I didn't find this experience to be particularly fascinating, in fact, I didn't even look over the top of the tower, I do find fear to be an extremely fascinating emotion. You see, in psychology, fear is seen as this big, dramatic force that drives us to act. It happens in seconds, and it's the emotion that saves lives. But it's also been used for centuries to control and persuade how populations of people act. It's what monarchs use to control their subjects, and how social hierarchies were maintained. But our present-day applications of it are just a little different. More than trying to explicitly exert control on a group of people, it's usually implicitly hidden behind many of our messages. For example, and I know everyone here knows what I'm talking about, it's what our parents used to get us to eat broccoli. Eat it or you can't watch TV for a week. It's the same emotion that a lot of businesses and organizations rely on to convince their customers to buy a product or act in a specific way. Buy this now or you'll lose money later. If you don't do this, the world will end. Pretty intense, right? But here's a problem with fear. It works in the moment, sure, but what about in the long run? You see, persuasion is all based on memory. For something to influence our behavior in the long run, we need to be able to remember it. So is fear really that effective? Well, looking at all the past literature, it's been identified that more negatively salient emotions increase memory recall. So that makes sense for why fear is such a popular tool of persuasion. But is it really the most effective? Well, here's the plot twist. Cue the dramatic music. Research from the University of Melbourne has identified an even better emotion for increasing memory recall. Disgust. Yeah, I know, gross, right? But hear me out. Studies have shown that while fear grabs our attention fast and gets us to respond to danger immediately, disgust sticks with us and has a lasting impact on our emotions and our memory. And so I wanted to test this out myself. I designed a study very similar to all past studies, but how it changed was instead of looking at longer time intervals like the 45-minute interval, I tested to see how our memory changes soon after seeing the disgusting and fearful stimuli. So I showed participants 14 disgusting images, 14 fearful images, and asked them to recall what they saw at the 5 and 10-minute marks. They were also asked to complete working memory tasks in these intervals. And these were essentially just tasks like Sudoku to get them to actively participate in completing a task while implicitly encoding what they previously saw into their memory. After collecting all my data, my initial findings were a little confusing. I just assumed that since disgust-based images had always been remembered better, that was the pattern that I would be seeing in my research as well. But at both the 5 and 10-minute intervals, fear-based images were actually remembered better. So then I decided to graph the changes over time for both these emotions, and this is where it all made sense. Over time, fear-based images were actually forgotten, while disgust-based images were remembered better. And this is consistent with the idea that disgust is a more drawn-out emotion, and we remember it better over time. But why? Looking at the back-end memory processing for both these emotions, it can be hypothesized that the memory processing networks for disgust, which are just sets of neurons in our mind that work together to encode what we see into our memory, are more complex and better at encoding information compared to that of fear. Additionally, these pathways are based on avoidance, and the concept that disgust makes us feel like we need to avoid stimuli that makes us feel disgusted. And as a result, it's better because fear gets us to act immediately, but it doesn't last forever. So what does this mean for the world around us? Well, it changes the way we think about persuasion. Fear, yes, it promotes urgency, but then it fades. And our body also has so many fear defense mechanisms, like repression, which are just ways to cope with the daily fearful factors or stressful factors and not think about it constantly. As a result, over time, our urgency fades and we go back to our comfortable routines. But disgust has been scientifically proven to stick with us for longer. So now, instead of we're going to die in 100 years from global warming if we don't switch to electric vehicles now, we changed that narrative. We showed people how disgusting pollution really is. Showed people the dirty brown waters that so many people and animals are forced to drink every day. Or the thick black smoke from factory chimneys that we're all breathing in. That's an image we don't forget. And the really beautiful thing about disgust is that it pushes us to take steps to avoid living in that consequence. One of the best applications of this can be seen in smoking prevention ads. A study conducted by the CDC presented participants with advertisements that promoted non-smoking and advertisements that used visual graphic depiction of the consequences of smoking. And they found that the visuals were far more effective than any other type of advertisements. While these visuals had both concepts of fear and disgust, the images themselves were more heavily rooted in the disgusting biological consequences of breathing in toxic chemicals over the years. It pushes people to feel what it's like to live with scarred black lungs and feel that disgust. And for non-smokers, it pushes people to take steps to avoid living in that outcome. And this is just one of the numerous applications of disgust in persuasion. And so that is my challenge to everyone here, marketers, leaders, influencers, and college students. Let's rethink the tools we use to drive action. Instead of focusing on what scares us, let's use a far more effective tool, and instead focus on what grosses us out. And if we can change that style of thinking, then maybe we can create a lasting impact. Thank you.